one of the things that we learn a lot from the deacons' membership calls. They share with Pastor what they're hearing. And one of the things we were hearing was the main thing that really pricked my antennas was that a lot of members, or I wouldn't say a lot, but there was a considerable amount of members who said they were not going to take the vaccine. And so I wanted us to talk to people we know. And at this time, I'd like for Kendra, can you unmute Dr. Brunson? And then also unmute Dr. Alicia. And I'll start with Dr. Brunson. I know, Dr. Brunson, you've done some research around, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've done some research around people's inhibitions, especially in the African-American community when it comes to health care. And so would you talk a little bit about that and how you see this vaccine?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. So, most people think about that and they think babies, but there's actually a lot of things that we do. And one of the things that I got really interested in when I was in residency was actually around oncology care, people who care for gynecologic cancers, things like uterine cancer, cervix cancer, those kinds of like woman part cancers. And I got really interested in sort of end of life decision making and things like that. So some of the research that I've done was actually around the ways that the history of like mistreatment and sort of the abuses and kind of oppression of Black people have really by the healthcare system, right? By healthcare providers historically have sort of left this shadow, this sort of legacy of concern. And of course, people hear about Tuskegee, and of course, people, hear about these historic things, but you don't have to look back to to Tuskegee, right? I mean, we have had events as recently in the last month or so at my at IU Health with reports around discrimination and concerns coming forth of Black community. We continue to see really high rates of 3 to 4 times the rate for Black women dying in pregnancy or sort of related to pregnancy. So these disparities, as we call them, but really inequities, right? They're pervasive and they're present day. And then when COVID came on the scene, right, we saw, not that most of our community wasn't shocked, the rest of the world seemed really surprised. But again, this sort of disparity, this difference, multiple fold where Black people were dying and being affected at such higher rates than, their white counterparts. And I think, we could talk, and I'm happy to answer questions about what contributes to that. But I don't think that that's sort of where we want to put most of our time this evening, though it's actually really important to understand, because there are some people who immediately see those kinds of differences and want to make claims about genetic differences and something different about biology. They try to use those things to try to make arguments about inferiority on some level, when really it's about exposure and it's about vulnerabilities that the system imposes on us based on that same long history and trajectory of oppression and exclusion and marginalization and all those big words that mean that we've been treated badly for centuries. And so don't fall for that okie doke. And then when it comes to this COVID, I think my message is also like, let's not fall for the okie doke. We watched the administration, just as Tyler Perry noted, wreak havoc, right, on our whole notion of what, the sky is blue. Is that true? It seemed like nothing that was said was true, could be trusted, could be believed. And this undermining of anything related to like fact, science, like people didn't know which way was up and what to believe. And so I came through the last year, if you start me off in March, I was reading the fine print and the back blogs, and I was on, Black people, maybe, there was conspiracies about everything. Was it made in a lab? Was it brought out here to take us out? That's where our minds go as a community. And I'm a physician. I have done all of the studies and been in school a long time, as you know, and I'm like sitting there and I'm like, well, I'm not sure it's not true because as I say, it's not paranoia when they're trying to kill you, right? So that's me being silly. But the reality is that we do live in this based on a history and a current moment where there's just a lot coming at us. And so I understand why as a community, we carry these real like fears, concerns, skepticism, hesitancy about anything that people are offering us from the government, because it's always hard to know, whether this is going to be like a bait and switch kind of moment, whether they're really trying to cause us harm. And so I've heard the conspiracies, I've considered the possibilities, and then I had to sort of move forward. And, I am a physician. I am trained. I do sort of also hold real high regard for science. And I had to look at the science and I had to start trying to understand really what was going on. So I'll tell you the things that I was worried about, and then I'll pass it over because Dr. Sanders is a teacher at heart. And I know she can't wait to tell you guys about the mRNA technology. So I'm going to let her do that. I can see it in her eyes. You don't have to. But what I did was I went to, I think really a sea change happened. I was still stuck from all the way to actually the vice presidential debates when Kamala said, or let me say, Madam Vice President, when she said, if Trump says to take it, I ain't taking it. If Fauci says to take it, I'm taking it. That was like her exact quote. And I was like, she is singing, like that was the exact thought process that I had, because I was like, we can't trust these people. How do I know what's coming out? Is the NIH in on it? All of these questions and skepticism all the way into the fall. So I just want you to know that I have like been there in that moment. Mm-hmm. But then there was sort of a turning point for me when I actually was sitting in some talk, and they were helping to explain about the speed of it, because that had been a big concern. It was so fast, like he said, warp speed. And then I had to put that in context, and I started there's some history about vaccination development. You can look, I guess the fastest ever, and this was like decades ago, that they had brought a vaccine to market. It had been like, I think it had taken 5 years, and that was the fastest before. And then we got this one in 10 months, and people were giving super side eye, or I was at least. And then, but then you had to put that in context. First of all, we have mapped out the whole genome in the time since we last had to get a vaccine to market, that sort of warp speed. So, I mean, think about what you can do with your phone now and how long, if you go back 30 years, it would take to be able to look up, hey, Alexa, can you tell me what the weather is outside? Like that, if you just on just that level of where technology takes us in terms of time, it made me start thinking, okay, maybe 10 months by comparison is actually not that short of a time. Then I learned that they had been studying the technology for the mRNA vaccination process for decades, as he said. Right. So it wasn't like some Johnny-come-lately new discovery or something off the back shelf that they were trying to sneak in. It's like they had been studying this at Zika, CMV, those are several viruses that have this same kind of makeup and structure that they had been trying to work, had the template, the blueprint for how to build a vaccine in response to that kind of a virus, even though we had never seen this particular virus. So they just needed the science to deliver the particulars of the virus, right? Once they were able to figure out the actual code for this particular new virus that we'd never seen before, they had all the machinery. They had the blueprint in place for how to put together a vaccine that could work against it. So that actually understanding that those building blocks had been there and really giving attention to sort of the history of vaccinations and looking at the relative speed compared to where our technology's taken us. For me, that was the first piece of, those were the first pieces to sort of start me turning the corner on saying, okay, I could see myself getting this vaccine. I'm going to fast forward, and I think we'll take the science questions if anybody has them about what exactly the mRNA, but I don't want to take up too much airtime. So I'll just fast forward to tell you that I got my first dose on December the 23rd. I'm one of the fortunate people who actually didn't have a bad, kind of reaction from either doses. So my second dose was 2 weeks later. I can say, because my network is kind of full of a lot of Black female physicians, a lot of physicians in general, by virtue of school and training. So my Facebook was kind of filled with people who were getting their vaccines and sharing their stories. And it was variable. So it is, reasonable expectation, kind of prepare yourself if you, that second time for the soreness. Some people even chills and kind of feverish. That's true. I've not heard anybody who's felt like that beyond like 24 to 36 hours. So usually if those symptoms kick in about 12 hours after they get it and they are taking Tylenol or some, Advil, Motrin, ibuprofen, whatever your NSAID of preference, usually people are feeling better kind of within a 24-hour window. And, I know some folks who it might have dragged on with a little bit of extra fatigue. But again, that's on the severe spectrum. And then there are people like me who, I don't know, some people say it's working. Some people, it's like, you should want the kind of little slight sick feeling because your immune system is strong and robust. They're really coming after those antibodies that are being introduced. And so, you can look at it either way. I feel like I was sort of lucky because my immune system was a little puny maybe, but I didn't have any of those symptoms. Both of my doses went off without a hitch. I did have some soreness in my arm and I was tired, but I'm always tired. So, because I work a lot, but I'll stop there and let Dr. Sanders sort of jump in. But that's sort of my story. I just wanted to really, that mistrust, it's not just a part of my research, it's also a part of my lived experience. And I understand what it means to be like, these people, how are you all of a sudden concerned about my good, right? Like to be just mistrustful about people coming in with these remedies, especially when they were talking about, targeted efforts to get to sort of the Black community. I will say one just last thing. Right now, if you look at the strategies that they're using, even though we described all these disparities, we know they're out there, they're actually not. And I think we actually should be questioning our policymakers' decisions. They're actually using age-based and sort of profession ways that a lot of the reasons why we see these disparities in vaccination rates is because we went first to like physicians and that workforce, and then we went to old people. We know that the life expectancy is not as long for people of color. So I think I'm not disrespecting anybody old. I'm just saying like the 80 plus, most Black people, that's like beyond the typical life expectancy for people of color. So I think that actually in their dissemination strategy, we're still seeing that some of the choices that are being made, they're not going to disadvantage sort of zip codes. They're not looking at sort of essential workers, right, who we know are disproportionately people of color. Like they could have made different choices in how to roll out a vaccine. And so part of our low representation is it's twofold, right? There is real mistrust, but I also want to make sure that at the end of the day, we take it because I don't want them coming back and trying to act like it was because we were so mistrustful. When really, if you look at their strategies right now, they're not actually prioritizing getting this vaccine out to us, which maybe we should take as another hint that it's not actually a bad thing, that it's a good thing, because they seem to want to get their people in the front of the line.
But let me say this for Dr. Alicia comes on. So yeah, the acceptability is an issue in our community, and that's why I want to have these conversations. But accessibility is also an issue, and so we're trying to make sure that we deal with both of them. And thank you for being so transparent to hear from a doctor that you had a journey before you felt like it was safe to take the vaccine. I think it's good. It's good for others to hear. And of course, Dr. Alicia actually had COVID. She sees it every day. So Dr. Alicia, would you talk to us as to why you think we should get in line and take this vaccine?
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. It is so good to see these beautiful faces, and I'll say some of these beautiful names since we got so many cameras off. Praise the Lord. So, so as many of you may or may not know, I had the infection back March of 2020, and actually Dr. Brum was one of the main people that convinced me that I actually did have the infection, because that was back when it really wasn't cool. Right. But I experienced all of it, GI upset. It wasn't until I lost my taste and smell. Let me back up. I had seen a patient that had flu-like symptoms. He tested positive for the flu. I thought, hey, if, I'd start to develop symptoms after him, it's more than likely the flu. I've had the flu before. It seemed just like the flu. But then I lost complete taste and smell.
When was that? When was that, Doc? When was that?
March 7th, 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was Saturday, March 7, 2020. And I mean, it was sudden. It was like at one moment I was tasting things, the next moment I could taste absolutely nothing. And I mean, there was no discernment. Sugar, sweet, spicy. I mean, there was no discernment. During the course, I developed my first migraine. My eyelids hurt. My hat goes off to all migraine sufferers, because Lord have mercy. Chest pain, shortness of breath. Ultimately, it ended up taking about 24 days for my cough to go away. And I'd say around 6 months is when I got to about 98% on my taste and smell. So wow. It really was a doozy. Shortly after, so Dr. Brown was one of the ones that convinced me I did have COVID, because I refused to get nasal testing. I'm like, well, if I do, what's the point now? So I ended up getting antibody testing the next month, and it was positive, of course. And so I was like, well, what did this do to my body? We don't know what's happening. You see all the symptoms, you hear about the symptoms, but what is happening on a vascular level or a neurological level? So I got some blood work done. I found that my clotting factors were elevated. So I was at an increased risk of a blood clot. My kidney function was worsening. So it's called acute kidney injury. So I had acute kidney injury where my baseline is called creatinine was almost double what it's supposed to be. And my blood pressure. Usually I run 120s over 70s. I was consistently 160s, 170s over 100. Like just consistently, just would not come down. So talked to my PCP about it. We didn't start blood pressure medicine, but we did start a daily aspirin to just thin that blood just a little bit, get things circulating. In terms of athleticism, I love to work out. It's always been a passion, and I could barely walk half a mile before getting completely winded. I was coughing all over the place. But then thankfully there's muscle memory. So I was back to running and back to doing all my usual level of activity around, I'd say about 4 weeks after initial infection. So, once I got back my pace and got back to doing what I usually do, things did start to normalize. But I will tell you, it was a full 7 months before my blood pressure returned to normal. It was a full 7 months before my blood clotting factors returned to normal. 7 months before my kidney function returned back to normal. And my normals, I'm just going to throw a number out to you, is 0.7. I'm at 0.9. So it's still in the normal range, but it's not where I was before. And I will say that's around the time actually when my antibodies wore off, if you will. So there are a lot. And I mean, I'm going to hang on to it as long as I can, but I'm still in my 30s. Right. And so all this is happening in my 30s. So I can only imagine what it would do, to someone double my age. Do you have the room to have something happen to your kidneys? Do you have the room to have elevated blood clotting factors? So, that's what COVID does to you. And we still don't know. I mean, we've seen skin disorders. We've seen strokes. We've seen blood clots. We've seen so many disorders from the actual infection. So everyone thinks the end all be all is death. But morbidity, the things that happen to your body while you're living, is still very important. So that was my driving force behind the vaccine. When the initial studies came out and, it's so fast and all this other stuff, I'm like, COVID came fast. Coronavirus, yes, that's been around since the 70s. They've studied it, extensively, found that it was lower on the totem pole for, risk factors. Influenza, beat it out over these last 10 or so years. But it's been around for a long time. But this COVID-19 came by fast. I'm okay if the vaccine came around fast. Of course, I did my research as well. But when the opportunity came for me to get it, I looked at it as, let me give myself an opportunity to make sure I don't experience anything that I experienced from March until September again. Let me give myself an opportunity to be able to hug my family again. So I think my first one was December 27th. I don't quote me on that. It's been it's been a long time. I've slept since then. And the second one was 3 weeks ago tomorrow. After the first one, I did have arm soreness for about 36 hours. I say maybe the next day I had a mild headache, but it was nothing compared to anything I experienced during COVID. The second one, you couldn't even have told me I got a shot. I had nothing, no body aches, no headaches. I mean, like Dr. Brun said, I mean, I was fatigued, but I mean, I'm chronically fatigued. I have 3 kids. I don't know. So, I mean, for me, it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when, because having experienced it, I knew that was something I would fight tooth and nail to never experience again. That's my story.
Yeah. Wow. And you just made a really important statement. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, especially Dr. Leash and Dr. Brunson, these variants are showing up that are more contagious. And so if we don't get the protection we need, the elevated probability of us catching COVID is really pretty high. And so both of you recommend that we get these vaccines and get in line and not let somebody else have your protection is basically what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And I can make an analogy. Let's say you and your family, you guys are all like Superman. You know, you are amazing, you're strong. And then this stranger comes up with this kryptonite necklace and you don't know what it is at first, but you go on and y'all at a family reunion, you and your Superman-like family, y'all at a family reunion, this stranger with this kryptonite necklace comes up and you're like, what is that? I'm interested in what this is. And you get a little bit closer and you realize, oh, that's something that's going to make me weak. So then you invite all your other family members over to try to investigate this necklace that they have on, and you fight it off. You fight off the necklace until you can recognize that anytime you see this necklace, it's going to be bad for you. So I need to fight it off sooner. So it doesn't matter who's wearing the necklace. You know, that's the spike protein. The spike protein is the necklace. I don't know if you guys know anything about that part of the mRNA, but anytime your body sees this necklace, regardless of who's wearing it, is going to fight it off so that it can protect your body and everyone around you. You understand?
And that's what happens when you take the vaccine, you mean?
When you take the vaccine is recruiting different members of your family, so the different parts of your body, to come and fight it off.
I see.
Yeah, that technology, I think I don't know. I mean, I think it is important to understand the immune response. And I think we could talk about that more if that was interesting to people. But I think the most important thing, because I think that some people really have a lot of fear and there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the notion that people are injecting the virus into you. And that's really a key piece of this technology, is that they're not, there are some viruses that have like live virus, and that's how your body learns to recognize it. But those are not as those are usually not viruses that cause this kind of harm. So this is not putting the live virus or even inactivated virus. It's not putting virus into your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's putting this mRNA, which is basically tells your body how to basically create this protein, that spike protein that she talked about, which is on the surface of the real COVID. All your body needs to know how to recognize is something that's on the surface of the COVID, like on the outside of the ball, to be able to mount an immune response, like she's saying, for it to be able to learn how to recognize that as enemy and that as something that's going to make me weak and be able to come and mount an attack to it. So I think that that's the important piece, is that your body is not going to see the virus from the vaccine. And then even the mRNA is destroyed and disposed of. It doesn't like integrate into your like DNA or your genetic material. It actually, even the messenger, which is what mRNA is, messenger RNA, even that little component that was that comes into your body to set off the alarm, it's actually disposed of. So in that regard, I think some of those traditional concerns about, are they injecting the virus into me? Now, people have all kinds of theories about chips and that kind of stuff. I can't go down that path, guys. That's not science, that's not a thing, but but people's concerns about them putting, about virus entering into their bodies, I think is because there are other models like that. You need to be very clear that that's not this kind of
So, yeah. So if I've had COVID, am I okay now because I got antibodies?
They wear off, like Alicia was saying. You want to speak to that, Dr. Sanders?
Yes. So the average amount or length of time that you have antibodies to supposedly resist a COVID infection is 90 days. We have found that in some people, it can last up to 6 months. Me personally, it did last up to 6 months. But after that, your immunity, your ability to fight off the virus fades. So if you've had COVID, if you've had it within the last 30 days, okay, you're okay to not get the vaccine. But once you get closer to 90 days, it is recommended that you go ahead and get it so that you can get your antibodies back and fight off the infection.
And I believe you can correct me if I'm wrong. You can get the vaccine even if you had COVID within 30 days. So you can go ahead and still get it. They're not saying that you shouldn't get it because you've had a recent infection. You actually can still get it.
Right.
Okay, so I see quite a few questions coming out. Pastor Tony, you want to throw some of the questions out real quickly? And
Yes, sir.
Okay.
One member says that she has Bell palsy, and should she take the vaccine?
I want to speak real quickly to very specific sort of diagnoses. Because this isn't even like a legal thing. It's just like a truth thing. Like I can't even see people's faces in the boxes. So I feel like neither of us can really give you like a medical, advice in that regard. I think that if you have a condition, you should talk to your doctor. And if you don't have a doctor, then we could potentially refer you or help you in that regard. But I think if it's a specific condition, it should be a decision made with a provider who knows you. That said, I want to give a general sweeping comment that for a lot of chronic conditions, like people who say, oh, but I've got lung disease, or I've got really bad diabetes, or I've got all those things that are risk factors that make you more likely to get more sick if you get COVID. Those people should, most of the time, like check with your doctor. But for most of those conditions, you're actually it's actually more important for you to get the vaccine, not less. So I don't want for the folks. And I actually saw a question about cancer. And again, in a broad sweeping sense, I just saw the Cancer Center, the newly recruited IU Cancer Center lead, talking about how can we get our patients, moved up in the queue. So again, another sort of vulnerable population from a health status standpoint, and they're advocating to get those patients from the in terms of the health departments. They're the ones who are assigning the order of priority. So they're advocating to try to get cancer patients for closer to the front of that line. So I would suggest that for most conditions, and I can't speak to the specifics of Bell palsy because frankly, I don't know, but I think for most of those chronic conditions, those are actually folks that if you have a chance to get to the front of the line, you should take that.
All right. Pastor Tony, I know you said that we have so many questions, we may have to have another call. Is there any other 2 or 3 real hot ones that we want to somebody's asking about the longevity of the COVID vaccine, or then somebody asked about the difference between the 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. And I know we got Johnson & Johnson coming on board. And so is any difference between those 2 vaccines, guys, that you know of?
Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. It's going to be a dose, and it's a different technology. It's still not like an inactivated or live virus. So it's still not that category, but the science is a little bit different.
It's different. Okay.
Dose virus for Johnson & Johnson, which is not yet, I don't think, FDA approved and on the market. The 2 that are out, Pfizer and Moderna, are, for the most part, they're both mRNA viruses. They have differences about how they're stored, which are meaningful from the provider standpoint in terms of like how cold it has to be and that kind of stuff. But not, to my knowledge, real meaningful differences in terms of the experience of them from the patient perspective. I don't know if you've heard different things from that, Dr. Sanders, but I think that those are going to be comparable in your experience of them. The other thing that I have heard, there's some slightly different, like on the level of like a percentage or 2, maybe if you look at the fine print differences around efficacy, but both are high 90s, like highly effective.
Yep.
And then the other thing is that I know that Moderna came out and said that they had some protection, that they had protection against some of the new variants that are coming out. I can't quote that on the Pfizer one. I feel like I saw that early on, but I can't quote it. I don't know where I saw it. I'm sure that I saw that Moderna has some protection because I saw that question in the thread. And the variants are going to be, what I suspect is that you may not have at quite as high a level, but you'll get some protection, I suspect. And I think either way, you're probably going to be protected from more severe disease by having some aspect of antibody. I don't know enough about the science, but I think the fact that they're all still going to be coronavirus, like they're still going to have those spike proteins. I think that you're going to be able to mount a response against it that's probably protective. I just can't quote anything about like to what degree or how effective it's going to be.
So I had Moderna, my sister Hope and I, and either you have Pfizer?
We both have
Pfizer.
Pfizer, okay. And so I'm just saying that so that as the congregation, we've had different ones, and all of them. We had we get us, the Moderna takes 28 days in between shots.
Right.
And the Pfizer takes 21 days in between shots. And so we still have a few more days to go before we can take the second Moderna shot. Pastor Tony, is there any other burning thing you think we should, as far as the questions for this?
There's one.
I did. Yeah, I did want to address two things that I see in there.
Yes, go ahead.
They wanted to reiterate that we do still need to wear our mask after we get vaccinated. Absolutely. You still need to wear your mask. You still need to socially distance because, maybe if a bunch of vaccinated people hang out together, they can be maybe 3 feet apart. But if you're still with people that are unvaccinated, you can carry it asymptomatically.
Right.
Give it to them. Or they can give it to you. And granted, Pfizer's 95% and Moderna's 94.1%. That means that there's still a 5 and 5.9% chance that you could still get, a major illness from it. So you still have to wear the mask, still have to hand wash, still have to socially distance for now. And then how long will it last? We really don't know yet, unfortunately. As it stands right now, it looks like it may be an annual vaccine. What Dr. Braun was referring to, Moderna did come out in the news saying that they are back in the lab. They are looking at the new variants coming out, and they are going to have a booster dose that can kind of combat these new variants. But what it looks like is going to be like the flu, where it's just every year, you never know what you're going to get. And so every year the vaccine may change a little bit and give you another booster. But to definitively say, yes, it's going to be an annual vaccine, we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Alicia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can't choose most of the time. It's going to be based on availability oftentimes, especially right now. It's going to be based on the supply that the state gets in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't mix them.
And you have to complete the same series. But I mean, people may have their little jokes and things aside, but really, I think you should get the best. The best one is the one that's in your arm, the one that's available. That's the best one. So I would just encourage you to get the ones that are available to you.
Yeah, I really hope that this conversation tonight has convinced many of you to go ahead, and the opposite or the ramifications of you not being protected is too high for you and your family, for you not to really consider taking the vaccine. And I'm doing all I can to try to get people in line and not let someone else. See, the very people that didn't want to wear masks and help this thing spread are the very ones now trying to break and get in front of the line to get vaccinated. And it makes me so angry because a lot of them didn't want to comply like we should have to keep this thing from spreading. And we've lost some wonderful people.
Amen.
My heart still hurts because people would not take responsibility to look out not only for themselves, but for others. And now they want to break the line and get the vaccine.
Okay.
So don't let people steal your protection when you can. I know some of you are not quite old enough yet. When that time, your age group come, please jump in line. Don't let someone else have your protection. So you can see your grandchildren, so you can see your family and get back to family reunions and all those things. One day we hope